Hey guys, welcome back to the Casual NBA Fanatic podcast. In today's episode, we're just going to be covering the opinions that I had from one of my reels that I released through last week, which was my rank of the top 5 point guards of all time. So basically, this episode is just going to be a fun historical discussion that we can have that obviously is extremely divisive towards NBA fans as well. Everyone's going to have their different take on things. Everyone perceives things very differently, especially when we start to bring in historical perspectives. And so with that, let's quickly get into this discussion around my top 5 point guards of all time, which if you didn't catch my video from last week, I had at number 5, Chris Paul, number 4, Isaiah Thomas from Detroit, Oscar Robertson at number 3, Steph Curry at number 2, and then Magic Johnson at number 1. And the amount of different debates as well that can be had with any ranking, obviously like this, to this also degree, is pretty absurd. But obviously to keep this relatively concise, this discussion, we'll just cover the 3 biggest arguments and question marks related to this list based off your guys' input, starting off with the guys that I did leave off on this list and why I did ultimately go with Chris Paul ranking at number 5. And why I really think the 5 spot of this list is the thing that does cause the most debate, especially because in my opinion, and I think towards most NBA fans, I think that top 4 of the all-time point guards list is pretty undeniably set in stone, especially when we are looking at the scope of actual greatness and what you achieve in this NBA league. And so at number 5, the number of guys that were competing for that last spot in this list for me were pretty absurd. I mean, the guys that I bypassed on, and also the guys that you guys threw up as mentions as well, were in no particular order. We had Steve Nash, Jason Kidd, John Stockton, Walt Frazier, Bob Cousy, Russell Westbrook, Gary Payton, and Kyrie Irving. Now, as every greatness-based ranking goes, we have to differentiate between best, as in like your literal like skill, talent, whatever, but then also your greatness as well, which more refers to your accomplishments, your level of dominance relative to your era, and your contribution to the evolution of basketball. That's how I view things. And when I'm ranking greatness, I lean more towards that side of things. Obviously, though, you need to have a balance of both. But for me, Chris Paul, obviously, yes, he doesn't have the elusive ring or rings that some other guys like Jason Kidd, Gary Payton, Kyrie, Walt Frazier, Bob Cousy, any of those guys do. But in reference to his era, obviously, we have to give him more leeway considering the competition and the rapid growth the NBA is experiencing as of the last decade especially. But for me as well, Chris Paul absolutely mastered and blended the role of a point guard so exceptionally, just between the ideals of the traditional basketball standards where we look as a point guard towards like those facilitating measures, the passing, the pace controlling. Those are the traditional vital musts, but also just having the transcendent skill as an elite pick and roll threat, even throughout to his like basically his 40s. Also a top 3 pocket feeder in the NBA, one of the most elite pull-up jump shooters that we've had over the last 2 decades, and just an exceptional point of attack defensive pest as well. And just the overall versatility of Chris Paul's impact for me is what separates him from guys like Steve Nash and, someone who was a historical weak point defensively and someone who did lack the physical resilience of Chris Paul. I think Chris Paul's much more versatile than a guy like Jason Kidd. Even though Jason Kidd probably is the second most versatile point guard of all time, but it's because, J Kidd did severely lack that jump shooting aspect that Chris Paul brought, and he couldn't instill that same gravity punch to his half-court initiation like what Chris Paul could. A guy like John Stockton, someone who also couldn't instill the same value as a scoring threat with the athletic and the polished gap between those two guys as well. And so to me, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, Chris Paul is the most versatile impacting point guard of all time when we're looking at his overall skill set. And he truly mastered the art of his role for such a long span of time in multiple different scenarios, In terms of this guy's accolades as well, like when you are talking about accomplishments, this guy is an 11-time All-NBA guy. He made 9 All-Defensive teams. He's a 5-time assist champ and a 6-time steals leader who's now racked up 21 years of experience in this league, who had over half a decade being the best point guard on the planet. And this guy was a winner by all means as well, and even by recent time. And for someone who plays a very, Chris Paul's someone that plays a very specific, methodical pace. Like, he doesn't actually, speed up tempo overly much as well. And for someone who does command quite some usage as well, I mean, this guy was just so exceptionally portable as a talent. And like when you look at from like situation to situation, just how he's able to blend and impact offense so immensely. And it's because he always commanded sustainable and efficient half-court offense better than anyone for his time. You know, we talk about even like in those later years, like past his prime, he goes to Houston. They become one of the most overpowered regular season teams of all time, 65-17. He goes to a dying OKC Thunder roster, expecting to drop a ton of games and being one of the worst teams in the league, falling from contention status, but they somehow claim a top 5 seed in that heated Western Conference in the bubble year. He goes to Phoenix the next year, a team that finished 10th in the West the year prior, and he pulls into a 2nd seed and a finals run and finishes top 5 in the MVP race. And then the next year, he builds upon that, winning 64 games the very next season, making Phoenix the best regular season team in basketball. And so like, this guy impacted winning just so instrumentally everywhere he went. And that's why, to me, that no rings argument for Chris Paul is extremely lame and I think pretty ignorant way of viewing this guy, especially this guy who just produced such a massive total body of work in this league. And that's why I did have to view him as a top 5 point guard to ever grace the sport. Obviously, the next debate, though, was mostly to do with like the suggestions for the other 2 current day point guards. Obviously, there's a reason why I took Chris Paul over guys like Steve Nash Stockton and Jason Kidd. But the other 2 guys that were thrown up from you guys specifically were Russell Westbrook and Kyrie Irving. These are 2 guys who have extreme fan bases as players. And obviously, personally for me, like, we'll start off with Russell Westbrook. But personally for me, as a Russell Westbrook fan, like, he's literally the player that made me fall in love with the sport and OKC. And like, I obviously would love to give Russ that respect to put him up here, but it just does not work for me at all. I mean, Russ was a top 5 player in the sport for a short stint of time, but certainly a claim that is more of a testament to his individual greatness at his peak powers for me. And like, obviously the team argument is where he starts to lose a bit of ground here. And like, when we are reviewing Russ's career, he was certainly a generational and all-time athlete. Like, no one can take that away from him. But the degree in which he impacted winning from his contribution compared to a guy like Chris Paul, you know, Isaiah Thomas and so on, that was the gap for me there. Obviously, Russ as an individual talent was absolutely exceptional at his peak as well. He's one of the most undeniable rim pressuring athletes the league has ever seen. Someone that could physically and athletically create offense at an erratic but respectable level for a regular season team as the lead head of the snake. But in terms of the ceiling raising as the primary point guard, that was relatively capped as the 1A. And in terms of like efficient offense, and like in terms of the efficient offense that he could create, just the pull-up shooting tendencies and like the lack of shot polish, and like, you know, especially as he aged as well, that really takes away much of that sustainable approach and also that longevity argument for him. Defensively as well, I don't think this is really a question between Westbrook and Chris Paul. Westbrook might be one of the weakest on this list that I named, pretty much because of the lack of off-ball awareness. And that was at such a consistent rate. I mean, obviously Westbrook towards the later portions of his career was someone who could be a high-level defensive playmaker. But in his prime years, Russ never quite weaponized the athleticism and the motor nearly enough. And he was one of the worst off-ball movement trackers you could find, which did kill OKC against teams like Golden State when they came along as well. So I don't think the argument's quite there in terms of just the versatile impact, the longevity argument, and a point guard's role to create sustainable offense. I think that's where Chris Paul does get the leeway over Russell Westbrook all time, despite Russ maybe being a more talented player with all the athletic advantages that he brought to the game. Kyrie Irving, though, was the other current day point guard that you guys brought up that might, you know, should have made a run for this. And I assume you guys probably thought should have replaced Chris Paul. And obviously in the media, this has been a bit of a discussion point of recently. Obviously, Kyrie Irving, in terms of talent, when we're talking about skill and like, you know, movement fluidity and like, you know, being able to actually like just the handles and stuff, being able to create space, hunt the shots that you want and being able to make them at the highest level of all time. Obviously, Kyrie Irving in that standpoint is probably more talented than Chris Paul. But in terms of like the body of work, that is the question here. Obviously, skill, talent, and like, you know, even just Kyrie's true positive impact, that's never in doubt. But he just never put it together, you know, either at the level of individual dominance in the league as a top 10 superstar. He just never did that for a prolonged stretch of time. And then also just the matchup resilient playoff determined skill set, that also wasn't on display for long enough for him to grant weight in this top 5 argument. But obviously, though, more is to wait for him in that department. But basically, just when people bring up the rings argument, I just don't think he's actually prolonged. Like, he hasn't won multiple rings. I don't think that's an argument that you can throw to hurl him into that top 5 argument over all of those other guys who have achieved just so much in this league. And then from an individual standpoint, I mean, maybe by talent-wise, he's been a top 10 player in the league he had that for a few years, but he never quite did that for long enough. And obviously, like, with the injuries and like the off-court issues that happened in the heat of his prime when he was in Brooklyn, you know, the whole Boston saga as well, I don't think he ever quite was a top 10 player in this league. And if he was, he might have been on that borderline list for maybe a year or two. But besides those guys who were the honorable mentions, the last quick point I wanted to hit off with this was obviously the big debate around the final 2 guys on this list, and that is Magic and Steph. And this has now become one of the toughest discussions to have, only because of how much Steph has added to his resume over the past few years. Obviously, in this list, I did go with Magic Johnson here in the greatness specific argument. And this one really, I won't go too deep into it, but when we are thinking of greatness, Magic was the 80s decade GOAT. 5 championships. He led 7 number 1 offenses. 9 straight years on the All-NBA first team. 9 straight years placing top 3 in MVP voting, with also 4 assist titles. Also as the all-time leader in career assists per game in both the regular season and the playoffs. And to top that off, he's also got the 3 finals MVPs too. And so with Magic as well, like, obviously this guy's actually starting to get a little bit underrated, especially by fans who haven't quite watched him too much. But this is a guy who is undoubtedly on the Mount Rushmore of offensive GOATs as well, and that can't be understated. There's a reason why guys like Tyrese Halliburton are so glorified for what they can do as a literal quarterback for a team. And in terms of the value of that archetype, you got to look no further than this guy, Magic Johnson. I mean, 6'9", arguably the most prolific transition player of all time with how he conducted the pace, with these god-tier fast break reads, with continued repeated success, and just the speed that he brought as that low block defender as well, off the rebounding pass outlets as well. He's the greatest post-up guard of all time, who led the greatest offensive dynasty of all time because of the efficiency piece being so staggering with Magic. And one thing I want to cement into my argument as well is, of course, Steph's shooting is the transcendent skill that makes up his argument, but Magic's actual, like, the passing superpower trait, that was nearly as important in his era. And like, with how suffocated space was in that 80s decade, like, I mean, if you go back and watch, I mean, you'll see just how cramped the spacing was and how hard it was to generate quality paint reads in the half court. But Magic Johnson, as the absolute GOAT of post feeds and paint passing in an era that so immensely needed that trait to thrive in the slow half court, that was why the Lakers absolutely dominated that era offensively. And his size, speed, reaction time, and audacity just helped LA milk enough margins to a level that gave them so much leeway, and why their offense stands as the greatest from a decade-long standpoint, with Magic as the ultimate NBA quarterback and offensive captain. And so Steph is also someone that I obviously have huge respect for in this argument. I think he's a certified top 10 player in the history of the game, who obviously has played in a much tougher era in terms of competition, but in terms of matchup resilience as well. I mean, it took Steph more time to fully delve into that domineering prime that he had to hit than it did for Magic. And you look at Magic's career, I mean, he immediately was one of the top superstars in the NBA, winning a finals MVP in just his rookie season. And like, obviously there's a reason why this debate is close, and it was extremely close for me too. But arguably as an offensive weapon, like, as well, like, Steph is more transcendent just in a vacuum because of the off-ball stuff that he brought and how he did revolutionize the game. Like, he still fueled a team that won 4 titles with his literal floor gravity value. And he may be literally the best on and off-ball offensive player of all time. Like, we're talking about a guy who holds one of the strongest arguments when we do look at this. And there's a reason why he is contending Magic so heavily. And it's not just the individual, like, skill piece that people bring up, but this guy's 2 MVPs, a finals MVP, 2 scoring titles. He's the all-time leader in really everything to do with threes at supreme volume. And he's the longevity GOAT of all guards in NBA history. But to me, what Magic achieved as both from an individual dominant standpoint relative to his era, but also from an accolade standpoint and just also just purely a value standpoint, that makes him a greater argument than Steph Curry currently for me. But obviously, again, I value previous decades more than what most people would, and that is where all-time arguments are pretty hard to have, because like obviously everyone values different perspectives totally uniquely, but this was just how I viewed it, and this is how my views came to when I did rank my top 5 point guards of all time. I'd love to hear your guys' certified ranks, and I'm going to be coming out with a top 5 shooting guards of all time list, and naturally I'll go through the small forwards, power forwards, and centers as well. So if you did enjoy this episode, make sure to follow the podcast and also check out my Instagram at Casual NBA Fanatic for more weekly breakdowns, daily reels, and deep dives. And I'll be coming out with more ranking related content very soon. So I appreciate you guys for listening to this short episode here, and I'll catch you guys in the next one soon.